said.
The following podcast contains movie spoilers, unpopular opinions, outdated pop cultural references, and occasional f***ing language. Listener discretion is advised. In 3, 2, 1.
Rolling sound, quiet. Speak.
Good day, good world. You're tuned to Subgenre, a podcast about the movies. I'm your host, Josh Dasal, and on Subgenre, we're getting specific about films outside the major categories. In Season 1, that means we're immersing ourselves in the sometimes thought-provoking but always tense universe of submarine movies. In today's episode, we're time-traveling to the 1960s Soviet Union for a communist boat cruise with a nuclear-sized problem. Starring Han Solo lookalike Harrison Ford and the man with a very specific set of skills, Liam Neeson, in a Cold War action thriller directed by Oscar winner Kathryn Bigelow. Pick your captain and protect the state. This is K-19, the Widowmaker. And joining me by Zoom from the valley outside that city they call Los Angeles to gab about this time bomb at sea is the Senior Development Coordinator at Stupid Buddy Studios. That's the production and animation firm co-founded by Mr. Seth Green. It's Mary Thurman. Hey, Mary, how you doing?
Hey, Josh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
I am so happy to have you here to talk about this film. I had never seen this film before we decided to do this episode, and so I'm excited to talk about it.
I just feel like that was my one chance to seem more knowledgeable than you, but I also have never seen this film until we were going to talk about it. So unfortunately, I don't think that I was able to come in with that greater amount of knowledge.
Just not watching films, not watching submarine films?
Oh gosh, no. I mean, I, as a development coordinator or senior development coordinator, as it were, I read scripts for a living. I love movies. I mean, my heart is definitely in the animation industry, as you can tell from the company that I work at. But submarine films definitely have a specific niche for me because as a child, I definitely had like a deathly fear of drowning in the ocean.
Oh, no.
And so submarine films are already so tense and so intense. And I feel like that tension was just doubled or tripled for me.
So you had a fear of drowning growing up. How's that fear going for you now, living out by the beach?
You know, my therapist may have categorized it as a phobia, but we are doing much better.
And if I heard correctly, there's also a Dad Harrison Ford sort of thing going on too.
I might regret telling you this, honestly, but when I was younger, I was a child, was maybe, like 8 years old, watching the Indiana Jones films. And I was just like, man, Indy's so cool. Like Harrison Ford is so suave. Like what an attractive man. And my mother is watching it with me and she just nods along and she's like, yeah, I've always found him attractive. And I was like, see, we get it. And she's like, he looks like your father. And I was like, no, you've ruined this for me forever. That's probably the moment that sent me to therapy, but I'm not going to tell her that.
Regardless is not the right word. Because of that, maybe.
Yeah, there we go.
Happy to be talking about this film with you, K-19, the Widowmaker. Let's set this film up for everybody listening. What do we know about K-19?
What's so funny is when we decided on this film that we were going to talk about, I had actually never heard of it. And when I did a little research on it, I was like, how? How have I never heard of this film? I mean, it came out summer of 2002, directed by Kathryn Bigelow of Hurt Locker and Point Break fame.
Oh, yeah.
Starring Harrison Ford and Liam Neeson. I don't even think I have to give you their credits. Honestly, had a huge budget for what it was. I mean, it was not even financed by a major studio, but had $100 million budget.
That's big.
Probably the reason I haven't heard of it is it was a box office flop. It only made $65 million back. Definitely lost the studio money. It was also made by National Geographic Partners,
Right.
and I was so funny seeing that in the credits because I don't think I've ever seen a film that was made by National Geographic that is this type of film instead of a documentary about primates.
Right. No. For any corner of National Geographic, for somebody to say, we should do a submarine movie with Liam Neeson and Harrison Ford. I can't quite imagine that meeting, but apparently it happened.
But I mean, it's also based on a true story, which is very intriguing to me. K-19 is an actual Russian submarine that experienced some of these problems. And originally they actually did try to work with the crew of the actual submarine, but they kind of ran into issues with their portrayal. And some people thought they were taking too many liberties with the facts of what happened. And so they ended up having to change the names of the crew. However, when the movie premiered in Russia in October 2002, they did actually fly out 52 members of the original crew. And they mostly said that they appreciated Harrison Ford's performance, even though there was some liberty taken with the actual events.
They may be one of the few who enjoyed Harrison Ford's performance. We'll talk about that later. Let's not, before we get out of this part of the show, let's make sure that we talk about the writers. Being a screenwriter myself, we got to mention Christopher Kyle wrote this film. He is the screenwriter, credited screenwriter on Alexander. Uncredited on this film, a little script doctoring, a little rewriting by a playwright you may have heard of named Tom Stoppard.
I feel like I need to apologize to both of them because most of my criticisms of the film are going to come from the writing, and it's just... I'm sorry, Christopher and Tom, I apologize.
I am pretty certain that both Christopher and Tom can take the criticism. We'll see. We'll put them to the test on this one, but let's talk about K-19 in our feature presentation. Shh. K-19, The Widowmaker. At heart, this is a movie about a nuclear submarine that has a nuclear problem and the race to save it and the rest of the world. I'm kind of close there, right?
I think it would be much more funny to me if the nuclear submarine had a non-nuclear problem. Like that would be probably like a very unique take. But yes, you're on the money.
Well, this submarine film, like a lot of submarine films, like maybe every submarine film that I have seen of late, starts with a title on screen. And for K-19, The Widowmaker, it starts with the longest title sequence on screen. It just keeps going and it doesn't stop.
I'm so glad that you brought this up because I have a couple of petty commentaries about this film.
Oh, please be petty.
Possibly the strongest one is I just hate their graphic design so much especially on the title screen because, okay, like picture this. This movie is set in the 1960s. It came out in 2002. The font they chose looks like you're in the 80s somehow. And then like it comes up and it's like in 1961. And you're like, okay, you have to start with the year. And then it says like the rest of everything, even though it doesn't capitalize the first sentence. And then the second title also starts with the words in 1961 again. And I'm like, I did not forget the year already. It's like so repetitive.
And in that title sequence, we do get this, kind of ominous setup of for 28 years, this story couldn't be told. In 1961, the Soviet Union has enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world 2 times over. The United States has enough nuclear weapons to destroy it 10 times over. And they tell us about how we're building more and how there's nuclear submarines that are being deployed and how powerful men on both sides believe war is inevitable. It's only a question of when and who will strike first. Dun, dun, dun. Which just seems like the perfect way to start is Hollywood a bad word here? To start a very Hollywood movie.
Oh, what's so funny to me is this film almost exclusively deals with like Russia and the Russian crew, and it's like very specific to the Soviet Union. And for some reason they had to throw in the like fact that the United States had way more nuclear power than Russia in like this title sequence. I don't know. I agree. It's very Hollywood though. Like you expect it to be a lot more cat and mouse than it is from these like words that they chose.
Yeah. And really even from the poster. Let's just start at the poster. I don't want to linger too long on this, but the poster,
graphic design.
The graphic design. I mean, if you saw the poster, it's a big face picture of Harrison Ford and a submarine. That's it. It's Harrison Ford on a submarine, and that I think is what K-19 really presents itself to be in the beginning. And I will maybe save for a little later on talk about why it's taken me this long to see K-19. We'll get there, but let's move past these terrible titles at the beginning, and move to the first thing we see, which is a submarine, and obviously not an American submarine. This is a Soviet submarine. How do we know that? Because there are people speaking in various levels of acceptable accents that maybe imply that this is a Russian submarine.
I have to say that the levels of accents confused me so much at the beginning of this movie because like there's so much action going on and I'm like, oh, they're gonna fire missiles, like everything's crazy. And just different people have more or less of a Russian accent. And it took me, I got to admit, it took me probably until they said the captain's name to realize that this definitely was a Russian sub as opposed to just some sort of multilingual sub.
The accents in this film warrant an entire discussion, which which I think we should probably have in a while. It is just, they're a thing. They're a thing.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get back to the nukes.